This is The Hard Naked Truth with your host, Michael Jeffries. Each episode, we bring to you industry experts, disruptors, business owners, and even a few financial superheroes. It's time to let your guard down, embrace the naked truth, and conquer the financial jungle like never before.
Welcome to the Hard Naked Truth. I'm joined here by Dr. Craig West. How are you doing, Craig?
Good to see you, mate. I'm going very well.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. You're well, I've known you for a few years now, and one of the things that we share is obviously your background in field hockey. So, I really enjoyed the fact that you were original foundation of the Sydney National Hockey League team with Buster Birmingham, wasn't it?
It's a long time ago now, mate, and certainly a long time ago since I played, unlike you. But I loved hockey, and I still actually do some work with and in business with people that I met through hockey, literally 30 years ago when I was a young 20-year-old, not a 55-year-old. So, yeah, it's good. And it was a great background. And as you said, when the National Hockey League first set up, I was actually one of the two owners of the Sydney franchise, which was interesting. Don't ever go into the business of hockey because it's not a good way to make money, I can assure you.
It's a tough sport. It's amazing that it's that Australia's been so successful in it, and yet it's very difficult to make money in, and it's very difficult to promote or as a TV spectacle or anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm feeling it today, mate. I had training last week, and then had a game on the weekend. So I think I'm starting to get to the point where I think I'm too old for this. Should just be coaching, doing leadership.
That's it.
So Dr. Craig West. So what did you get your doctorate in?
Yeah, I did a doctoral thesis on using employee ownership plans for succession planning. So the key drivers of succession, and really the quick summary, because it's a very big document, obviously, the quick summary is there's been quite a change in attitudes towards exit and succession, with a lot of baby boomers already being quite wealthy, now looking at succession for legacy and stewardship. So employee share plans, for example, is a good way for them to give back to their employees. And so that's why one of the reasons they've become much more popular.
Yeah, and I'm quite passionate in terms of the usage of employee share plans, and obviously ensuring that you put succession at the front end when you're talking with clients. Really leading with that side of things, and you do find when you do that, clients actually become quite engaging in relation to it, because they don't a lot of the clients accountants and advisors are dealing with, their business is their biggest asset, and often we've talked about it, they'll you go, okay, so what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm just going to sort of walk away from it. I don't they don't put enough value in relation to putting in the steps and processes needed to ensure that they maximize the value when they are ready to exit or retire or finish up.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting and funny attitude, because we'd never do that with a share portfolio or an investment property or even your house. You'd never just go, I'm a bit over this house now, I'm going to walk away from it and leave it, and it doesn't really matter. But people do that with their business all the time, which is it's a really interesting sort of thing to look at, because as you said, most of them, it's their biggest asset, and it can be worth millions of dollars. And yet people just find it really difficult to get their head around what they need to do and devote the time and energy to getting the exit part right. And yet that's probably where they can make the most money.
How did you get into this, and what you do today in relation to employee share plans and succession planning and everything? What was the starting drive, the kickoff?
Yeah, look, I worked as a chartered accountant in a chartered accounting firm here in Sydney when I was quite young, and, working with a lot of business owners. So it was a really good background and experience to have. And I think it still is, I think it's a really important aspect to understand the financial operations of any business.
Yeah, definitely.
What I found was fairly quickly, I had several clients who were getting older. They weren't baby boomers back then, but they were getting older, starting to think about succession and exit. And because I was their sort of trusted advisor, they came to me and said, what do we need to do? What's the business worth? How do we sell it? What do we need to prepare? And I had no idea. I was a young accountant. There wasn't succession and exit planning wasn't really a thing back then.
Wasn't
And
talked
so I
about
got
at all.
online. I did a lot of research.
Wasn't talked about at all, really. Like,
No,
you know,
it was hardly ever brought up. It was not something you learnt as part of either your degree or any training. You know, I had 2 master's degrees at that stage, one in accounting and finance and one in tax, none of it on succession.
Yeah.
So these clients were coming to me saying, what do we do? And I sort of went, well, geez, I don't know, but I'll find out. So I went away and did a bit of research. I actually went to the United States, found a group called the Exit Planning Institute, did their course. It was a 5-day course, face-to-face in Chicago. This is before online learning and Zoom and, you know, all those sorts of things. So I had to go to Chicago, 5-day course, exam, everything else, and became what they called a certified exit planning advisor. Now, interestingly, I was, I think, the 3rd one in Australia to ever do it. There's probably only 25 people in Australia that have ever done it. There's 10,000 people in America that have this qualification, right? It's a big deal over there. I'm actually flying over in Friday this week. I'm flying to the United States to go to the Exit Planning Summit. And there's 1,000 advisors that all they do is exit planning. So that's you know, it's a big industry over there. So anyway, I worked with one client in particular who had a very successful business in water filters back in the day when you had the filter in the corner of the office and you went and filled up your jug or your cup and had a water. And we sold that business. I worked with him for nearly 3 years. We ended up selling that business for literally 20-something million dollars. Very successful exit, far more than he thought he could get. And I really thought then, you know what, I really need to do a lot more of this. The accounting work is important and someone needs to do it and do it properly and all that. But I found that kind of work hugely valuable. And I also saw the incredible difference it made to him and his family and his family's family, you know, next generation, all that sort of stuff. I thought this is a life-changing event for that owner. And so I literally walked out of there thinking, okay, I've got to do a lot more of this. Don't worry about the accounting work. Let's get into this. So I started Succession Plus in 2009, and all we do is succession and exit planning, and it's just grown from there.
Yeah, it's crazy that there, you know, when you think about what you talked about the US and compared to Australia, there hasn't been as much emphasis put on people actually training and going into the space, is there? Like it's
Yeah, I think it's growing and changing now. I think people are realizing there's a big market there. Obviously, the baby boomer generation drives a lot of that. It's driving it in the United States and in most countries around the world. And it's no different here. There's a lot of baby boomers that own very good, very successful, and therefore quite valuable businesses. And so as advisors, one of the things we should be working on is how do we help you maximize the value of that business and actually realize it, actually get the equity value of it out. For a lot of people, it's millions of dollars. And whether they take it out themselves, whether their kids inherit it, whether they give it or help their employees buy it, it doesn't matter. It's a valuable asset. And we should be working out as advisors, how do we help them maximize it, keep it going?
Do you find, I mean, in terms of like you talked about family and current employees and stuff, is there a certain weight towards people wanting to, you know, pass it on to family members versus employees, or is that changing, or is it?
Yeah, I think it has changed. I think there's 2 sort of key drivers there, and they're actually conflicting. One is that most baby boomers in Australia and around the world are already wealthy. Even if they haven't sold their business today, they've done very well. They've made good money in property. They've made good money in the markets, you know, share market and other assets. And their business has probably been, you know, if they're a baby boomer that started 30 years ago, it's been trading for 30 years, making money, paying dividends. They've invested that money into other things. They're pretty well off. And so they're starting to look at not just, I want to cash this out. I mean, when I had the accounting firm and working with clients, people would often say, I need to sell this for $5 million so I can retire. They don't say that anymore. They've already got $5 million.
Yeah.
They don't need it. So what they're saying now is, well, I want to look after my employees. I want to give my kids an opportunity to take over the business that I've built for them. I want to make sure that my supplier that's built these widgets for 20 years gets looked after. So that's that sort of changing driver towards legacy and stewardship. But on the other side, what we see is kids don't want to take them on. I've got a client at the moment who we're actually preparing their business for sale. And the reason we're preparing the business for sale is simply because the kids do not want it. Now, it's a very good business. It's been around for 20 years. Mum and dad have made lots of money out of it. They've actually bought the warehouse and the factory. They've done quite well. Kids don't want to know about it. The kids look at it and just go, I don't want that. You worked 60 hours a week for 20 years. I saw you doing that. And in fact, the kids go, and you didn't come to that school assembly when I was in year 10 and won that award because you were too busy at work. I don't want to do that.
I don't want to be that parent. Yeah.
I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to repeat that trend. And so the kids don't take them on. So you sort of got this, the boomers want to leave it to their kids or their employees, but then the kids are saying, well, I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to do something different. So there is a bit of an issue there. And I think the key way to resolve that is planning. You've got to start early. You've got to begin with the end in mind, know where you're trying to get to and work towards it. And unfortunately, it takes 3 to 5 years. So you've got to start early.
Yeah.
You can't leave it till you're 65 and then suddenly go, oh, what do I do now? It's too late.
Yeah. And majority of people are doing that, aren't they? They are just leaving it to and going, shit, I want to retire. We've got to sell it in the next 6 months or the next 3 months. And
it comes back to a little bit like I said about the house or the property. People think selling a business is like selling a house. Ultimately, you get an agent, you put your house on the market, it'll sell. You might not get quite what you wanted for it, but it'll sell. Like, you're not going to sit on it. Businesses aren't like that. They're really complicated assets. They've got a lot of moving parts. They've got a lot of risks. There's people, there's intellectual property, there's systems and processes and all sorts of moving things that need to all sort of work together to sell. So it's not as easy to sell. It takes a lot longer, but you're right. People are so busy day to day running the business, selling, doing marketing, doing whatever they've got to do day to day, looking after their people. They get to a point and suddenly go, oh my God, I'm 65 years old. I'd really like to retire. The husband or the wife's been in my ear saying, why don't you sell that bloody thing so we can go to Europe for a holiday? And then you're 68, then you're 70, and suddenly you go, it's too late. Like, I'm stuck now. And so that becomes the problem. You really have to devote the time and effort to it early enough to make it happen.
Getting back to the kids thing, does your team, because you almost become quasi psychologists through this process, does your team sometimes get to where the accountant advisors brought their client or the clients come directly to you and they're saying they want to set up something to leave to their children, but then when it gets to the table that you actually have the children then come to and say, hey, I actually don't want this, and then the path has to change? Does that happen?
Yeah.
Or are they quite set straight up? I want to start giving shares to my employees, or it's a mix of different circumstances?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know what all the options are and don't know what's possible and what's available to them. I think typically, particularly males, baby boomers, are bloody terrible at having the right conversations with the right people early enough, so they don't talk to the kids. They assume the kids are going to take the business over. I've actually had one client, it was really quite tragic, but one client organised a huge family event and made this massive announcement of handing over the business to the kids. And the eldest son walked out of the room in tears. I don't want it. And there's this massive family celebration to hand over the business. The kid goes, I don't want to know about it. Get away from me. So
you haven't even spoken to me about it. Yeah.
Never spoken to him about it, never discussed it. Nothing was organised. So I think people can have these assumptions about what's going to happen. The reality is, you mentioned the word psychologist. That's absolutely what we do a lot of. You have to actually sit down and have these conversations with the family. The kids often don't know. All they've seen is mum and dad's history. You used to work long hours. Now, a lot of businesses, yours and mine included probably, when you first start them, they're hard work. You've got to work hard. You've got to work long hours. You've got to keep grinding. It becomes easier over time. So if you've got a 25-year-old business that's profitable, you've got good staff in it, you've got good management, your systems are documented properly, then you don't have to work 60 hours a week. Then maybe that is more attractive for the kids to take over. But the kids don't know that. So you've got to go through this communication. You've got to go through this experience of letting them see what the actual business looks like. A lot of parents typically, my parents never, ever spoke to me about money. I never knew what they earned. I never knew what they had, where it was invested. It was just not a thing that anyone talked about. So the kids don't know that. So there's a whole education process there that's part of a succession model. I'm actually doing a plan at the moment. I've just written a large family succession document that talks to the kids about, there's a daughter who's not involved in the business and two sons that are. So they're actually giving the daughter the property assets. She's going to lease them to the business. The sons are going to take over the business. Now, that's taken easily 18 months to get to the point where we've actually got an agreement and we're about to document it. It's about to get legally documented properly, but it's taken 18 months because there's a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah, there is, because you'd have to consider what happens if the sons who have got the business assets, what if they don't make the lease contributions to the sister who owns the property? And
now she's got a property that's not worth much because no one's paying the rent. Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of complications and moving parts. And I think you also have to, yes, there's financial implications, there's taxation, there's asset protection that you have to put into it. And obviously, you guys are all over that stuff. But then there's also the family issues, the succession issues. Yeah. I did some work with a large family. It was actually a cotton farm up near Moree. And dad had left the property, which was the family home, to the daughter, and the son had been left the farm. The son spent about $300,000 building a 12-foot high fence so the daughter couldn't get into the house. Now, just lunacy. Like, we're talking a $50 million business. This is not a small business. This was massive. The guy had just inherited, literally $50 million worth of wealth, but he had the shits about some family thing that happened 10 years ago. And so he wanted to barricade the daughter out of the farm. Now, that's not accounting or tax or financial. That's psychology. Yeah. And you've really got to get that sorted, because it didn't matter what we did with everything else. If that wasn't solved, the succession was never going to work.
It's going to get out the door, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, you talked about before business is hard, which it is, it's and the importance of having the right processes, standard operating processes in place, and the right people in place. And obviously that adds value to the business regardless. So it's an important part of the journey. And that's why it's really, to actually go through this and go through this from the start or as early as you can, and start to be thinking about this and I guess all the triggers that impact value over time that you need to be looking at. And one of the steps in relation to obviously employee share plans and the exit is valuing the business, and that's something that you put at the forefront in relation to your processes, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's really important for owners to understand what the business is actually worth, and not just the dollar number. It's worth $5.2 million, but also, why is it worth 5.2? Why isn't it worth 4.2 or 6.2? And what's the difference? And as you said, operating procedures, systems, processes, all that sort of stuff is really quite critical. So we always start with a valuation. We've done them for a lot of clients, and it's really a good starting point to say, okay, what's your business worth today and why? And what could you do to take it from 5.2 to 6 or 7 million? Because there are things you can do. A lot of people talk about, the market will determine the value of your business. I don't agree with that. You can change the value of your business. Yeah. You can go in and, as you said, you can reduce the risk. You can put in systems and procedures. You can put in a really good management team that are incentivized with employee shares. That business is more valuable as a result of doing that. And so as an owner, the valuation's a great place to start. Get your head around exactly what you've got and what it's worth. Again, to use the house analogy, you go to a barbecue on the weekend, someone will say to you for sure, did you see that property at number 72 sold on the weekend for $2.4 million? Geez, that's a lot. I thought it only had 3 bedrooms, and I know the garage is really, like, everyone understands that. Talk about with a business, people don't know whether 3.2 is good or bad, because you don't know what you're talking about. You can't compare. Every hairdressing business is not the same. They're all different. Yeah. So you've got to understand what drives the value. And I think that's a really good place to start. What's the value today, and what could it be or should it be if we go and do certain things to prepare it, maximize the value, get it ready for sale or exit or succession?
And it's, I had a client the other day who was messaging me. He goes, I'm looking at buying this business. Can you tell me, here's the P&L. Can you tell me what it's worth? And I go, well, there's a lot of other factors go into it than just
absolutely.
Where, and starting whether the P&L is right for starters, but there's so much more, it's how big is a piece of string was effectively my response to him. We need to actually,
absolutely.
So what's the ideal process that your team runs through in relation to business succession planning and exit planning. We've
Yeah.
talked about a few little things that are great tools, such as employee share plans. But ideally, what should people be doing?
Yeah, look, there's basically 5 stages to a succession plan. The first stage is really what we call identify value. And that's
Yes.
about what is the value today and what could it or should it be of any business. And as you said, that's not just the P&L. Firstly, is the P&L even right? Secondly, it's all the non-financial factors. So there's economic factors like interest rates and so on that determine business value. But there's also the non-financial factors in the business. We actually have 150 metrics we use to
Wow.
determine the non-financial value. So does the business have a management team? How often do they meet? Is the owner still involved in the business at all, or is the owner the main salesperson? There's a whole stack of things, systems, IT, HR, that all impact that values.
Yeah.
First thing, value. Yeah. Where's it based? How do they sell? What do the systems look like? And then once you've identified the value, you've really got to get clear on what you're trying to achieve. So stage 2 is really, where am I headed? Am I trying to give this to my kids? Am I trying to prepare it for sale? Do I want to list it? Do I want to get a private equity firm involved? Because what you do in terms of preparation will be completely different. If you want to list your business on the ASX, the preparation is very different to if you want to hand it over to your 3 kids. It's a completely different scenario. The second thing we find is, and this comes back to the work that you guys do so well, is asset protection. The second stage is called protect value. We've actually got to stop and pause because most owners are not great at this. They're normally entrepreneurial risk takers. So they're good at that. They're good at sales and growth and, doing things. They're not so good at protecting assets and managing risk and identifying what needs to be done to shore things up. Then we get into the fun part, which is maximize the value. How do I grow the business? And that's where we get into things like employee share plans, things like documenting intellectual property, developing systems and processes and marketing and sales that are not dependent on the owner to really ramp up the value. And then obviously we get to the last 2 stages.
Yeah, is part of that. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, you're right.
Is part of that stage? Is it there, or is it early when you look at do they have the right structure in place? Like, because
right at the start. So when we do the valuation, we've got to review the structure as well. Who owns what, and what we're finding now is there's some interesting things happening there because we've got a company and the company owns the business and the trading operations and the stock and plant and equipment, but we also bought the property 10 years ago and that's in the company as well.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
What we find is, the bank said to put it there because that's where the cash flow was or whatever it was 10 years ago. Now we're ready to retire and the owner says, well, I'm happy to sell the business, but I want to keep the property because it'll be a great funding source for retirement. The business will keep paying the rent. And you go, hang on a minute, it's in the same company. Can't be there. It's not a good place for it. It's not good for asset protection. It's not good for tax or anything else. So there's a whole structuring piece before we even get to the business assets to say, well, who should own what? If you're going to keep that factory or office or shop, you might want to put that in a super fund, for example. So how do we get it from where it is today across to there? Then we can look at the ownership structure, make sure we've got all those assets protected, as I said before, and then work out as we move through a succession or exit plan, where are all these things going to end up? We're going to sell the business. What does that look like?
Yeah, because there's a lot often, and that's why the whole business succession planning piece at the start is so important, isn't it? Because we come across, we get a lot of new clients and stuff, and we see stuff which we deal with you as well, where and it's not saying necessarily the accountant did the wrong thing in the first place, but they're trading out of a family trust, for example, a discretionary trust, and then but their plans was to list this thing on the ASX, or their plans were to grow globally, and the structure wasn't right at the start, and so we've got to come through and clean it up. And they go, well, we might have done that for asset protection. Well, you haven't helped them in relation to where they need to and want to take the business to, and when you want to put things such as employee share plans, or when you want to actually do that sale event. So there's So
and a lot of that advice, it needs to all dovetail into each other because
correct.
Asset protection, taxation, exit strategy, that all needs to work together. You can't do one and not the other. They're all linked intrinsically. And that's often a problem when, you've got an old structure that was set up 25 years ago. We've added some stuff to it. We bought the property, we bought this, we added that, bought another business somewhere along the line. Now it's all in a bit of a mess in the structure. It's got to be cleaned up before you can actually get to the point where it is saleable, or you can pass it on to your kids or whatever you want to do with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then look, the last sort of two stages then when we get to that point is extracting the value is really about the liquidity event, whatever that looks like, a sale, a listing, a private equity firm or whatever. People always underestimate what that looks like, how long it takes, what it costs, what's involved. It's a complicated asset, and so there's a lot of work to do. It's not like selling your house. You can sell your house next month if you really wanted to. You can't do that with your business. It will always take longer. And then lastly, we've got the same problem all over again. We've now sold the business. We've got a check for $8 million, whatever the number is. We're now still got to worry about asset protection. We've got to worry about investments. Where do we put it? Who should own it? How do we protect it? And then we've got to think about, estates and protection of assets for next generation, wills, powers of attorney, all those sort of things to make sure it's all protected. So, there's a whole 21 steps that we take people through, but it's typically going to take 2 to 3 years to do all of that.
Yeah, but I don't think people realize how long that process actually takes, and they don't. And after that, often they, which I assume you see, undervalue the process. Like I put a high value on it because of the asset
Correct.
and doing and the what you can maximize in relation to that asset as well. They don't realize what we're assisting with them in terms of where they can get to and stuff. So.
Yeah, and look, it does take a long time because it's, as I said, it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. You've got to consider not just the succession and exit, but the asset protection, the taxation, the family issues. You've got to put all that together and come up with some sort of cohesive plan that can actually be realistically implemented. Otherwise, you're never going to get success.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and Craig, you've worked with obviously countless number of businesses. What are some of the patterns you see, if there are patterns between business owners and the way they do things and run, the way they've their thought process,
I think what you see, there's a lot of patterns where you see these behavioral traits, particularly where often business owners are in denial about where they're at and what their business actually looks like. They think it's well run and managed, but they don't realize it cannot operate without them. So that's a problem. That's a very common risk that we identify pretty early with a lot of clients. You just see the business is completely owner dependent. And if you take the owner out, the whole thing falls apart. So that's a big problem. The second thing is unrealistic sort of expectations about what's possible, what the exit strategy might be. I regularly get, I want to list this on the ASX, and you go, mate, you turn over $10 million and you've got 3 shareholders. Like, it's just not possible. You're going to spend half that money trying to do it and you still won't be successful. So it's sort of unrealistic about what the value is and what the likely exit options are. And then I think the last one is just timing, people understanding the time that's involved. Now, I always tell people you should have a business that's valuable, transferable, sale ready, always. That should always be your goal. Most people don't have that, but that should be your goal. And you should put the time and effort that's needed and the money investment to go and make that happen, because it changes the whole way you operate changes if you can get to that point. Often we get clients that come to us to prepare and exit the business and find out actually when they put all that in place, it's not a bad place to be and they're happy to keep it.
And that should really be like a living, breathing process, shouldn't it? Like I know when I was in CFO roles and stuff, we in one of the groups we effectively kept a live offer document or information memorandum that because we're with that thought mind and process in place that we are and we want to be for sale at all times, and if an opportunity presents, then or if we want to go down that path in relation to additional capital raise or anything, then we're ready to go. And we've got systems, processes, we've got the documents in place, we've got the forecast, the models, and we're set up. And that's not, that's not always easy. There's in a larger corporate, obviously, but
Sure.
but you can still break that down to an SME business, can't you? And
Absolutely. And I think the intent behind it's really good. Being prepared, being ready, writing an IM document's an excellent exercise because it actually shows you where the gaps are. You start to write about the management team and go, oh, actually, I got some gaps here. I got some big problems here. You can't write a document that sells it because it doesn't exist. So the discipline of thinking about that and getting the business sale ready all the time is actually good preparation. Absolutely.
Definitely. I mean, so the patterns you were saying too before, like we see it all the time. People don't realize that how reliant the business is on them, and if an event, and especially from the asset protection position and risk mitigation, including insurances and stuff, that if an event happens, they drop dead, or what the knock-on effect is of that asset for their family. So, and
correct.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
not just family, employees as well. So, what are the let's sort of deep dive a bit more into employee share plans. Let's start. What are some of the misconceptions out there in relation that you see and face when you're talking about ESOPs or employee share offer plans?
Yeah, I've actually had a couple of calls on this topic in the last week or so, and what you see quite often is 2 or 3 main misconceptions. One is that they're only for big companies, big corporates, listed companies. It's just not true. There's a stack of clients we work with. We've got more than 200 now that have got an employee share plan. Some of them have got one person in them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 200 people. It doesn't have to be a massive business. I think if you've got a business where there's anything more than yourself as a key person within the business, an employee share plan can help attract, retain, motivate that key person. The other thing that people think is they're expensive and complicated, and they're just not. We've made them quite simple. We've got a process we go through. You can get one set up in probably 4 to 6 weeks. It'll cost you 25 to 30 grand, which is far less than the cost of replacing just one person. So if you just use it to lock in one person, you're in front.
And people don't realize what those actual costs are. Like, it's astronomical because it's not just recruitment. And recruitment doesn't necessarily mean a recruitment fee. There's internal recruitment costs in relation to the resources used.
Absolutely.
To try and bring them in. There's also loss of IP for that person walking out the door. So it's
it's expensive.
It's very, very expensive exercise, and especially when you find the right person that you want on the bus with you, why would you want to lose them at any stage or risk losing them?
Absolutely. And that's absolutely right. And then the last one is really owners often think their employees either don't want or can't afford to buy equity in the business. And there are lots of ways that you can set that up. There are some very generous tax concessions for employee share plans. We use them to help employees fund their way into the plan. So, for example, they can salary sacrifice. Now, it's only $5,000 a year, so it's not a lot of money, but it gets them into the plan and gets them started down the journey. So that can work quite well. And then, obviously, employees now typically, particularly younger people, are quite interested in entrepreneurship and owning a business. They've learned about it as they were growing up. It wasn't something we did at uni. There was never a course called entrepreneurship back then, but there is now. There's plenty of it now, and there's plenty of lived experience they see with, Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and all the other examples of, and Australian ones as well, of very successful entrepreneurs. So they're interested in business ownership. They're not as likely to take the same sort of risks as our generation or the baby boomers took. So they're happy to own part of a business, particularly in an employee share plan, because generally they're owning it with 10 other key people. So it's much less risky. And so those misconceptions sort of sometimes mean people don't go down that path, or they're not sure it's going to work for them. But look, we've done, as I said, we run more than 200 share plans. There's 2,000 people in those plans. Very rarely do we make an offer to employees and they say no. They might not be able to write a check out for $100,000 today, but if you design the plan properly, they shouldn't need to.
Yeah.
They can gradually earn their way in.
Yeah, mechanisms for them to
Absolutely.
earn in.
And then maybe later down the track, they can buy more shares because they can afford to, and they've got the dividends coming through. They can see how it's working. There's actually mainstream banks that will lend to employee share plans now to help employees buy shares, but you've got to have a track record of showing how it works.
Yeah. And there's probably misconceptions too. I know people talk to me like in terms of the complexities of them. Yeah, sure, you can do very complex employee share plans, with derivatives and options and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And business owners get scared off in relation to having to explain that to their staff and everything. And I know your team is amazing in relation to going through the process of ensuring that there's the right buy-in from the team members or the employees, because one of the most important things is that they do understand the employee share plan and what it actually means and means to them, and including taxation and everything, so that
Correct.
because if you don't get that buy-in, then it's really a complete waste of an exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is. I mean, there's a lot of research about education being a very important part of setting up the plan. You've got to educate employees about not just about the technical tax and accounting and that sort of stuff, but why are we doing this and what's the difference between being an employee and being an owner? Because they're very different roles. And how does that translate? So, employees are quite happy to be involved. You've got to educate them properly. Again, it's a gradual process. So, if you want to sell your business between now and the end of the financial year, an employee share plan is not the answer. But if you're 55 and you've got key staff that you want to lock in and reward over that period of time, then it can work really well. We've got a large number of clients who've implemented a plan, and it's part of their succession strategy. It might not be all of it, but it's part of it. And it's working really well. Their employee turnover's gone down substantially. So their costs have gone down in terms of recruitment and training and loss of IP, as you said before. They can be a win-win scenario. They've just got to be designed properly.
And the employees really become business owners then too, don't they? So their mindset in relation to everything across the business changes, like in terms of.
And that's a really important point. When you own a business, you think differently to when you're an employee. And that's not to say employees are trying to do a bad job or anything like that. It's just you think differently when you own the business. So having an ownership mindset, we call it, amongst your employee base, you imagine in any business, instead of just one or two owners thinking about it as their own business, imagine if you had 20 people thinking about it as their own business. It changes behavior, and changing behavior changes performance. And therefore, the whole business changes because you've got a completely different approach.
Well, 1 + 1 suddenly equals 3, doesn't it? Rather than 2.
Correct.
So, yeah. And it was interesting. I had, we've just recently, I've ensured that we've put the CEO induction process back into place. I used to do it with our group all the time when we had new employees, but due to me being too busy, I sort of fell over the wayside and had other staff. But it's been an important process I've put back in. I did one last week before we broke up for the public holidays and everything, and obviously for the Easter break. And prior to that, what I was talking to the team about in relation to the employee share plan and everything was, I really consider myself just a custodian of this business, not whilst I have ownership in it at the moment, that I'm a custodian I'm guiding it at the moment, but I want you, the team who are going to be on the bus with us, to come once you qualify and you're eligible, that you then take it to the next step. And at some stage, I'm not going to be here forever. So, and I go, I didn't mean that in the wrong type of event, hopefully, but
no, it's important.
Yeah, it is. So, and you should see the way their faces, and the questions that started coming straight from that. I think that really sat with them really well. So,
yeah, I think as I said, people are keen to get an opportunity. They just need a framework to do it in, and education about what it looks like and how.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Craig, thanks for your time today. We've got a webinar coming up where we're going to deep dive even further into this. Really enjoyed our chat. Appreciate it always. And obviously we're working closer and closer together. So if anyone wants to find out more, reach out to me, and then I'll ensure that I'll put you in touch with Craig. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
It's time to wrap up another episode of The Hard Naked Truth, where we've stripped down the business world and accounting industry like never before. Follow all of our socials and share and keep following this podcast. Remember, when it comes to running a business and protecting your assets, keep it hard, keep it naked, and keep it real. Stay naked, stay truthful, and keep winning.